So, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the Gilded Age, and the Gilded Age is a time period of extraordinary growth in America during the years of 1877 to 1900. And the word Gilded Age comes from an author named Mark Twain, who wrote about an America that looked on the outside like it was um, smothered in gold. Like everything looked really good to the outside world, but on the inside, America had some serious problems. And so, by the end of this lecture, you will be able to answer the following questions. The first question is economic growth. What were the major sources of economic growth in America during this time? And what were the positive and negative aspects of America's economic growth at this time? In this time period, the American economy is growing at a very high rate, but there's always positive things and negative things about that. So we'll get into that. The second part is political changes. How did government deal with this growth? And was government effective or ineffective in dealing with America's growth? And the third question is social changes. What were some ways that American society changed during this time? So, let's get into the economic growth question here. This is the exact same wording as on the slide, so I'm not going to read it. Causes of rapid industrialization and economic growth. Well, first off, one thing that's causing America to grow is the revolution in steam power, as we now can produce engines that run on steam that is powered by coal that burns water and turns pistons and rods and so forth. You can make lots of things that have engines on them. And one of those things is the railroad. The railroad is going to be the number one aspect of a powerful economy. And you can see as I go through this that it's the first big business in the United States. It's a magnet for financial investment because businesses and investors want to invest in something that's going to grow the United States economy. It opens up the West and connects the western states to the eastern states. It aids the development of other industries, for example, meatpacking. More on this, when you have a railroad going through your town, for example, it develops other industries. You need to have hotels, restaurants. It's very important to have a railroad stop in your city, and even in our own state of California, that's how many cities were developed in the first place, because they were along railroad stops. And so the meatpacking industry is an interesting example because what in this case, um, when you have a factory that produces meat, for example, like in Chicago, a huge meatpacking hub, it's connected by railroads, and it allows a factory to produce meat that can be sold in far off markets across the country. So the only way to do that, to transport all those goods and services, is to actually have a railroad that's functional. And you can see just how many miles of railroad tracks there are. But the railroad powered by steam seems to be one of the tremendous engines of growth at this time. And then there's also just technological innovations that are happening too. Humans are always developing technology, but in this time period, the Gilded Age, there's a few that are of note. And one is the Bessemer process, which basically means superheating iron to make steel. And with steel, you can make railroad tracks, railroad cars, you can build cities with steel. Steel will become a very, very important part of America's industry at this time. refrigerated cars in order to transport meat or other refrigerated goods across large distances so that they can be fresh in far off markets and far off places. You now have refrigerated train cars that allow you to produce something in one place, freeze it or refrigerate it, and send it far off to sell it somewhere else. And so what that does is it expands markets and develops the economy. Thomas Edison, there he is. Thomas Edison is an inventor. There's other inventors, but just to highlight him, he had a lab in New Jersey called Menlo Park, and he was nicknamed the Wizard of Menlo Park. And he and his team of inventors developed all kinds of things that are symbols of invention at this time, such as the light bulb, phonograph, motion pictures. Motion pictures, a little bit of controversy there because there's a French person by the name of Lumiere that believed that he developed motion pictures first, but we won't dwell down too much on that. Here's some pictures of a phonograph, a light bulb. This is the first one that Edison developed. Edison didn't develop this. This is a telegraph machine, and the telegraph is, of course, going to lead to the telephone, and there's other inventions that I could talk about too, such as alternating current. And what's starting to happen in the Gilded Age is with so much innovation, the number of U.S. patents that are being granted during this time is exponential. But it's a time period of expanding growth. You know, we just got done talking about railroads. We just got done talking about steam power. Now we have other kinds of power and other things that are happening, especially electricity. Other causes of rapid industrialization and economic growth. Well, first of all, there's a ton of people coming into America at this time. There's immigrants, there's people moving in from the farms to the cities, and there's just plenty of people that want jobs. And you see these immigrants coming in off of a boat. And there's jobs for anybody that wants them. So it's a time of rapid economic expansion. There's capital. There's businesses and entrepreneurs able to provide the financial capital necessary to open up new businesses and create new enterprises. There's new entrepreneurs and their advisors that are going to create businesses. Okay. Innovators such as Edison, start their own companies, their corporations. All kinds of inventors and entrepreneurs that are going to take all this labor and capital and produce something that's going to be beneficial to the economy. And of course, the population's increasing like crazy because of, well, just natural causes, but also just immigration and population movement. So there's a huge market whenever you have population increasing. And the government is very pro-business at this time, very in favor of expansion and economic growth. There's no restrictions on economic growth, and really the philosophy of the government is to just kind of let the economy go. That's something that we call laissez-faire, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And of course, there's just limitless natural resources, or so we think there's limitless natural resources in America at this point. And there's really no restrictions on mining. You know, nowadays we talk about greenhouse gases and coal in the air and dirty air and all this kind of thing. And back then, you know, there was really no restrictions, and people were mining and trying to get these resources and trying to basically use them in order to profit from them. And you can tell in one example here that after 1875 all the way up till 1915, I mean, if you look at all the steel that's made from all of the iron that they're mining, it's exponential. Like the growth, that's the upward trend. I mean, if you can't remember anything about this time period, think about this. the word up, because that's what's happening to the U.S. economy. And in this example, that's what's happening to iron and steel production. Up, also in terms of relative share of world manufacturing. I mean, look at the United States back in 1880 and look at how much of the world's production we have in terms of manufacturing. But look at what happens as we start to advance economically. We start to grow. And by the beginning of World War I, the United States has roughly 1/3 of the world's manufacturing. So in about the space of nearly 30 years, maybe 25 years, I'm sorry, we have about doubled our industrial capacity here. And look at the rest of the world. I mean, Britain, who was the workshop of the world in the 1800s, starts to decrease. France starts to decrease. Germany, they increase, which is kind of interesting. The United States and Germany are the big beneficiaries of this, and so that's a massive change. Other things that are happening economically is the development of trusts. Now you see the Monopoly guy here, and if you've ever played Monopoly, you know what the object of the game is. The object of the game is to buy up the whole board, or at least most of it, and to try to own as many properties as possible so that you can put the other players out of business. And what's starting to happen in America is the same exact thing. You're starting to have the development of big corporations, we call them monopolies or trust holding companies, that try to control an industry. And the most famous ones are right here. Here's Andrew Carnegie, who owns a tremendous amount of the steel production in America. The steel industry, of course, focused in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. Of course, the football team, Pittsburgh Steelers, named after that, but that's another story. John D. Rockefeller here, who owned an enormously big company called Standard Oil. He was nicknamed Wreckafellow because of putting small oil producers out of business. Basically, that's the big idea here. And you have Cornelius Vanderbilt right here, who was owning a huge percentage of the railroad companies. So you have business growing, but you also have the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of really a few men. Here's a funny story about Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was actually seen at a party once smoking, I repeat this, smoking $100 bills. Okay, basically rolling up some tobacco and putting it in a $100 bill and smoking it. Okay, if you have that kind of money to do that, you are wealthy indeed. Boy, that would be great, wouldn't it? Okay, well, anyways, back to reality. Andrew Carnegie's profits, for example, just to show you an example of how much money he is making. Andrew Carnegie made a lot of money, and he was an American success story. He was came from a poor immigrant family. He's the story of the epitome, really, of a rags to riches type of situation. But the Carnegie Corporation makes so much money off of steel, and that's what this is designed to show you. Remember the trend up. And allowing this is something called laissez-faire, which is what I'm going to talk about starting in the next lecture.